Thank you, Rebecca. So how are we all doing? Everybody going to be able to stay awake during this highly stimulating presentation? I think we lost 4 in session 1, didn't we? They just, that seemed like it. Anyway, I'm very glad to be here today, and I'm even more glad to see you here today. So congratulations for attending this workshop, which I think is critically important. Let's go to the first slide, Jim. We're coming up with a title for this. When thinking about a title for this, I thought, you know, there's power in partnerships. And Stan Kelly asked me to do a presentation on how best core officers and advisory board members can work together. And a good, strong partnership between the officer and the board member can create tremendous symmetry and synergy and power for the Army within the community. So I thought the power of partnership was appropriate. Let me tell you a little bit about Jeffrey Byrne and Associates. I'm out of Kansas City. Jeffrey Byrne and Associates has been around for about 12 years. We raise funds all over the country. Primarily, though, in the Midwest, although we're in the midst of a rather large project with the Army in the Western Territory. We do capital campaigns, endowment, major gift campaigns, board training, volunteer training. We also are a member of the Giving Institute, which is kind of the watchdog organization for fundraising professionals throughout the country. And we have very much of a Midwestern philosophy approach and methodology to our work. I thought I would just take a couple of minutes to also tell you a little bit about my experience with the Salvation Army. I don't think I've met any of you previously, but I was born into the Salvation Army family. My parents were Salvation Army officers, and I was born a 5th generation Salvationist. So the Army in our family goes way, way back. My father and my grandfather were fortunate enough to be selected to serve as national commanders for the Salvation Army in different generations. And my brother, who followed, Norman S. Marshall III, I always say I'm so grateful it was him and not me. He became divisional commander of the Eastern Michigan Division, headquartered in Detroit. I'd like to think that I know a little bit about the Army. I'm bringing comments to you today. We're going to talk about the topic that I think is based upon my experience over the years, not just as a professional fundraiser, but as a Salvationist, as somebody who has been in the ranks. I really do think of myself still as a certified son of the regiment. I think we're going to be talking about today a topic that is monumentally important to the Salvation Army. You know, in my opinion, the Salvation Army is one of the most relevant organizations in the country today. Its organization and its leadership skills are really in many ways second to none. You remember what Peter Drucker said about the Army, the best run charity in the United States, due in part because of its mission to meet human needs in his name without discrimination. The Army is well known within the communities it serves, and in most of those communities, the overwhelming in most of those communities, it is held in the highest of regard. It has an unswerving dedication to stewardship. Now, as a professional fundraiser, which I've been for the last 35 years of my life, charitable organizations having a strong sense and commitment to stewardship, in my opinion, is critically important. And we bandy around the percentage of 87% of everything we raise goes right back out into service to the community. I really think that's unparalleled. And so the Army is terribly relevant because not only of the way it spends the money, but the way it looks after the resources that are entrusted to it. And what makes it extraordinarily relevant is the Army behind the Army. How many board members here today? Raise your hands, please. 3. We have 2 corps officers. You're from where, sir?
Beloit.
Beloit, and you told me you were from?
Racine.
Racine. And you, ma'am, where are you?
I am actually the assistant to our captain in Green Bay.
In Green Bay. Love Green Bay. I worked at Michigan Tech University for 4 years, and every time we needed to go shopping, we would say, we go Green Bay. What a great place. The Army behind the Army, critically important to the work of the Salvation Army, but an area in which I have real concerns in terms of how are we working together, officer and civilian, officer and volunteer. How well is that meshing, really? It's one thing to read it in a book, in a manual, in the advisory board manual, but what is really happening out in the community? I'd like to think the Army gets very high marks. I mean, the Red Shield is one of the most recognized brands in the world, not only in the United States, second only to the YMCA. In its communities, high regard and tremendous reputation. And from a fundraising point of view, every year it finishes in the top 5 in terms of funds raised by charities in the United States. We know that from the Chronicle of Philanthropy, which studies those numbers. And why is that? It's because the Army has such a tremendous reputation. People know we're good stewards. People know that they can trust what we're going to do with their money, and therefore they are very generous in giving. I was thinking that if William Booth were sitting here today, he would be nodding his head, I think, and listening to what I'm saying, but I can just hear him saying, well, that's all well and good, but that and better will do. Now, for you officers and perhaps some of you board members, you will know that was one of his oft-repeated quotes, one of the most famous quotes of the founder of the Salvation Army, that and better will do. We're going to talk today about, in my opinion, an area where better needs to happen, where better definitely will do. Okay, let's go to our first slide. I was looking for reference to the topic today in the Bible. And it certainly doesn't talk about advisory boards in the Bible. But I ran across this quote and I really liked it. I really thought it was relevant to what we're going to be talking about today. Where no wise guidance is, the people will fall. But in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. Show me a corps with no advisory board or an advisory board that is dysfunctional and not willing to do anything, then I will show you a corps that may be closed within a reasonable period of time. Because the counselors are not counseling. And the priests, the officers, are not asking for it. Obviously, there's a dysfunction. But where there is a multitude of counselors, there is safety. Proverbs 11:13. Next slide, please. Let me go through a few things rather quickly. You may have heard of some of these repeated in an earlier presentation this morning, but I think it's worth mentioning, and I'd like to mention them to you today. How to grow the advisory board. The primary responsibilities associated with board membership are, 1, to understand and appreciate the mission, the motive, the purposes, and the objectives of the Salvation Army, to give support and encouragement to the Salvation Army officers, to give advice, counsel, and guidance to the Salvation Army officer, to become familiar with the functions, services, and objectives of the local Salvation Army. I have worked with Salvation Army boards literally all over the country, and particularly most recently in the Western Territory, headquartered in Long Beach. Our firm was hired to do a territorial-wide development study, or an audit, if you will. They preferred to call it an assessment, but it was an audit. And it wasn't just about direct mail and plan giving and special events. One of the major topics was advisory board involvement. And it's an area of real concern. And one of the things that we found was that advisory board members didn't know enough about the Salvation Army as they should. Because what do we need our advisory board members to be? Ambassadors. Because you know the community. What happens with your corps officer? Corps officers may come and stay for what, 3, 4 years? How long have you been on the board, sir?
About 5 years.
Okay, how many officers have you had?
We've only had, this is our second one this year.
Okay.
Major Moore has been there for 12 years before
Wow.
he left for the cross.
That's unusual.
Yes, very unusual.
And
Usually
you were,
it's 4
you
or
were
5
mentioning, Captain, this morning, you got there, what, a year ago?
Yes,
And you'd had a succession of how many within what period of time?
6. It's officers in 10 years.
6 officers in 10 years. That's about 1.6 years per stay. How can you get anything done, let alone get to become familiar and comfortable with your board? Sir, where are you from?
Marinette, Wisconsin.
And how many officers have you, how long have you been on the board? Since Moby Dick was a minnow?
I don't know, about 8 years or
8
something
years.
in there.
And how many officers have you had?
Oh, 1, 2, 3, I think it's our 4th one.
Okay, now I just want to ask you, I want to ask you as a board member, we're going to get away from this for a moment. How does that make you feel?
As a training ground.
As a what?
As a training ground. We get them and
And they move it.
then they move.
And are they always moved because they've pushed them to somewhere higher? Or has there been movement for other reasons?
We know.
But as a board member, do you feel as though you're able to really accomplish a great deal with that quick turnover?
No, sometimes I feel like we're not being used like we should. Although, you know, with one officer and limited number of volunteers in our smaller budget, I think we get a lot done for what we've got.
Pretty good bang for the buck,
Yeah.
yeah.
We have a Christian Manna program that serves meals 5 days a week, and we have a good group that handles, you know, people coming in and out, which we hear very little about.
Yeah,
I mean, our biggest function probably is the Red Kettle campaign at the end of the year,
fundraising,
fundraising, right?
yeah, okay. Now, you mentioned that you've had a Corps officer there for a
Yeah.
relatively extended period of time.
It worked very good. We are very active. We have 25 to 30 people on our board, and we really get a lot of stuff done.
That's
We take care of
terrific.
32,000 people a year. We have all this quote standard of programs.
Mhm.
And, you know, it's a very good Corps. I'm from Madison, Wisconsin.
Oh, you're from Madison, and you have a relatively new Corps officer
Yes,
and
yes.
the major.
Yes.
He's a terrific fellow,
Yeah.
wonderful man. Well, the turnover can be very problematic, and I think we see more of that than we see the prolonged stays. My brother was the divisional general secretary in Detroit for 4 years, and then became the divisional commander for like 7 years. It was one of those extraordinary lengths of service, and it served the division extraordinarily well. Not that he was, you know, walking on water type of fellow, but for having the same leadership in place for that long a period of time makes a profound impact. Now, Captain, you're in a situation where you've only been there a year, but they had 6 and 10 years, and what did you feel was the result of that on the board?
Well, it's clearly the board, as I met with them in September, they were dysfunctional. They sort of just looked at me and said, "Are you another one?" And I said, "Well, this is my, you know, I had a plan." And I said, you know, number one, we're going to do the Red Kettle, the kettle campaign, and you're going to be part of it. Well, we never really have done that. We sort of just left it to the businessmen to do it. I said, well, change is good. We're going to do things a little bit different. We went from 60,000 that they raised the previous year to 400,000.
Wow.
Now, that wasn't because of me. That was because they were empowered to go out and work in the community. And you know, it's as simple as that. I mean, it's not as simple, but it's as complex and as simple as that. You know, it doesn't take anyone special to do that. It just takes the people that are active in the community. People like you have been in Madison probably their entire life, who know what Madison is about.
We just have excellent core people and excellent, we have a woman that I think knows every human being in Dane County. She just retired
I was gonna say, isn't today her
I don't know how
last
we're
day?
gonna function without her.
It's a wonderful topic because that individual, even though she's an employee,
Yes.
she is a member of the Army behind the Army. you know, and we talk about that Army behind the Army. It's not some, you know, cute little quaint phrase. It's an extraordinarily important phrase because of the very fact that officers move so much. And for the most part, it's kind of planned. You know, things happen. We all know that. People get sick. People, a multitude of reasons. But you've got that change at the top that happens within the Corps, happens at territorial level, happens at divisional levels. And so what becomes incredibly important? It's those people who comprise the Army behind the Army. Let's go to the next slide. I'm going to deviate a little bit from this. Learned that a little bit from our first presentation. Another very important responsibility is found at item number 5, to become familiar with the means by which the local Salvation Army operates. Now, this has to do with really understanding the case for support for the Salvation Army. The what? The case for support for the Salvation Army. The case for support for the Salvation Army is not the mission statement. We're gonna talk about the mission statement in a moment. And I hope my moving around is not gonna screw you up too much. Take out the word screw you up too much. He's taking it for T.H. Gibson. Every corps has its own case for support based upon the community in which it resides. And every corps board member and every corps officer should be in tandem with the understanding of what that case is. It should be crystal clear, so that when a board member is on the 14th floor of the highest building in your community, and somebody says, "You're on the Salvation Army Advisory Board, aren't you?" What do you do there? That's not when you start tap dancing to the elevator music, okay? That's when you have to be prepared to say, well, we're doing this, we're doing this, we're doing this. Now, simple question. Do you have a case statement for your corps? Has the board been given a case for support?
Not sure we do.
Okay, which probably means you don't. How about you, sir, Madison?
I'm not sure either, no.
Yours is changing now because of what's going on in Madison, I believe. You've got some change in the future. How about at your corps? How about you, Matt? Where are you from?
Beloit. Beloit.
Beloit, I beg your pardon. Case for support that you're aware of?
Not that I know of.
No? Okay, how about you?
We're developing it, so.
You're developing it.
Yeah.
Good to hear that. All right, I think that's a real area that needs improvement on all fronts because you know, board members are ambassadors. They really are. And you as the Corps officer have to be willing, ready, and able to provide them to be what? The very best ambassadors they can be. Because why? Because you can't be everywhere. My father once said to my brother and I, he said, "Boys, whatever you decide to do in life," and my brother hadn't decided to be an officer yet, "and if you get into a leadership position," he says, "please remember this. Your job as a leader is to make sure that everything gets done. Your job as a leader is not to do everything." And I think a lot of our officer personnel fall into that trap because either they're embarrassed about how they are relating with their board, or they think that they know better about the Salvation Army and these are just people from the community to come see me once a month. Whoa, that's a major problem. Your job, Captain, is to make sure that everything gets done. It's not to do everything. And I'm sure you know some officers within the division who are just, you know, singing the blues. I don't have any time for anything. I'm not even going to be able to take vacation this year. Why? Oh, because they have to boom, 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 boom. And the question is, well, what's your board doing to help you with that? Well, that's when they want to get on the elevator and start tap dancing to the elevator music. You can see why I'm a little bit concerned about how boards and Army officers are integrating together. I believe there's an awful lot being left on the table, and I'm not just talking about money. Although, friends, money is a key matter for the advisory board to be responsible for. And I probably ought to bring that up right now. I'm really going off of the agenda here, but you know what? That's okay. Do you feel as though, and I'm just going to ask the board members again, do you feel as though your prime let me rephrase that. What do you think your primary responsibility is as a board member? Let's start right over here.
Well, supposedly it's to give advice, but I
Now-
don't think we're being used that way.
Okay, so that's what you think it should be, but it's not necessarily what is happening. How about in Madison?
Well, and our board is fairly aggressive, in fact, sometimes a little too aggressive. We have 6 committees, and they're all
Wow.
very well run by people that are the chairmen and attendants. I think we sometimes get in the way a little bit, but there's no lack of participation.
So again, you would consider your major responsibility as a board member to be,
Yeah, whatever we're assigned to or we agree to do and stuff, that's what we're supposed to do, and that's what we try to do.
okay,
So when we have a finance committee meeting, sometimes, our major and we don't necessarily agree, but we are able to talk it out, try to work it out,
excellent.
and it seems to function okay.
He should be up here. I should be back there.
I'm a newbie.
Let me go back to, what is, again, you're from Beloit. What do you consider to be your primary responsibility as a board member?
To help advise our captains in any decisions or problems that arise for them.
Okay,
We're kind of going through a tough time right now, but
are you
yeah.
changing leadership or?
We did it a year ago, but we had a lot of problems we had to overcome, and we're all trying to overcome them.
Okay, good, thank you.
Excuse me. I
Yes.
think we're trying to build our board up. We've got too many old people on it. We need some younger people on it,
Yeah, yeah.
and people who come to meetings. It's hard to find people, at least in my opinion right now, hard to find people who volunteer time.
I'm
It's
going
only the older people that have the time to do it.
I'm going to address that very topic in just a few minutes, but you've just hit on an area which many board members consider to be the number one issue with Salvation Army advisory boards. Let's go to the next slide. Go to 8, see what 8 has to say. To support the Salvation Army as a charitable organization, realizing its dependency upon charitable support for its overhead and operations. Have you ever heard the expression, give, get, or get off? I know you have, Captain, you've been around. Give, get, or get off. Let me ask again, I'm going to treat this presentation quite a bit different than I did the first one, because I want to get a lot of input from you. Let's start back in the corner. Do you have on your board, even though you're going through transition, you're still functioning under some policies or procedures that you set up from years before? Is there a policy, is there agreement that every board member must be a donor? Is there an expectation that you're going to be a donor to the Salvation Army?
Not that I'm
Nothing,
aware of.
nothing that you've seen in writing?
No.
Nothing that's discussed at board meetings? How about over here? No. Madison?
Ours is,
Yeah.
but whether that happens, I have no idea, but yes, that is talked about.
And is, in the case of Madison, which appears to be the most advanced, no offense to any other corps here, but it appears to be the most structured, advanced board that I've run across today. Do you have
I
a
think it's
set,
very well organized.
do you have a set dollar expectation?
I think I've heard it occasionally, but I'm not sure that that's emphasized. It's that you give, and that you might say adopt, if you will, a particular event, like we're just starting a Macker basketball event. So
Right.
people are supposed to, a certain number of the board are supposed to get into that, give to that. We have something called the Tin Cup in September, which is the introductory thing where we bring people from the community in for soup and bread, and someone speaks about the Salvation Army. We have clients come and talk to people. We do that. We have the Christmas in July, which is a separate entity. We obviously have the kettle at Christmas time and stuff like this. But people are expected on the board to buy into, if you will,
Right.
one of these things or more.
The reason I ask about a set expectation is that most boards that are really doing well and functioning well, whether they're Army boards or non-Army boards, do have a set written expectation for financial participation on the part of the board members. You know, I found in the Army, that seems to be almost one of those taboo questions. Ooh, don't bring that up, they'll get mad, or you'll lose somebody. Okay, they'll lose somebody. That may not necessarily always be bad. What I found in the development audit we just completed with the Western Territory is, out of 10 divisions, there was only one division that had on its divisional advisory board a expectation of giving. And it was a dollar amount with San Diego. As we know, they've got tons of money there, they can probably do that. All the other divisions did. It didn't have to do simply because they were poor divisions. San Francisco, Los Angeles, Seattle, Portland, those are not poor cities. It's just that they didn't feel as though they could put into place giving expectations and have their board members feel okay with it. Why? Because it had never been brought up before. Okay? Now, what they did in San Diego, in addition to having a set dollar amount, they recognized that they had some people on the board who couldn't afford to give at the minimum level, which for them was $1,000. Not a ton of money, but in some cases, it's going to be a lot. But they wanted to have these people on the board because of the skills they brought, their social service contacts. It might have been somebody from the Department of Social Services with the city of San Diego. They don't get paid a ton of money. But they wanted them on the board for their expertise, so they created separate memberships. They were still full-fledged board members, but they were more social memberships than regular board members. But here's what they said. Even though we're giving you this special membership, you have to contribute something. And so what I came away from that was that it may not be a bad idea for every board to have an expectation that says we need to have 100% participation with this board. And it would be lovely if everybody could give X amount of dollars, but we know that's not possible with everyone. But you can give something. Now, why is that important? Because it speaks volumes to the community. And it particularly speaks volumes when you're trying to raise money from foundations. Foundations will say, okay, you can apply to us. You want to get $50,000. One of the first questions out is, what's the involvement of your board? And there goes the elevator tap dance music again with far too many boards. Why? Because we just don't seem to be able to communicate to our board members the importance of personal financial participation. Now, personal financial participation, as you know, in Madison, because you guys are doing this all the time, and perhaps you've done it with your boards as well, and maybe your board members are. It's more than just writing a check, isn't it? It's about going out to others and asking them to give. So the core officer needs to make sure that his or her board understands, this is, I think, critical, that the board members understand that they have a financial obligation as a board member to the Salvation Army. Now, I don't think anybody can argue that we don't need money. Oh, we've got more money. Why do you need to give me, why do I need to give you my money? We've got more money than we need. I haven't met a Salvation Army Corps yet that was in that position. And if they were in that position, it wouldn't last for long because they'd find something to spend it on. I'm quite certain of that. So again, supporting the Salvation Army is not just writing a check, but it's getting others to give. It goes back to that ambassadorial role, which is what? To go out and proclaim the good news of the Salvation Army in that community. And to try and get those people in. I love what you said about soup at the core. I'm working with the Salvation Army in Springfield, Illinois right now. We're coming to the conclusion of the capital campaign. They hold weekly soup at the shelter. We're raising money to build a new building where the shelter will be the centerpiece. Soup at the shelter. And they're bringing in some of the wealthiest people from town to go to this soup at the shelter. And you remember the baseball movie, if you build it, they will come? If you show them, they will give. That really comes into play in Springfield, because if you saw the conditions that the homeless have to live in our shelter in Springfield, I don't think anybody here would want to live there, in one of those shelters. It's all about, it's about philanthropy, your own personal philanthropy, and your ability and your willingness. I think willingness is is probably even more important than your ability. Your willingness to go out and get others to give. Point 9 and 10 have to do with facilities. I don't know if any of you are thinking about a capital campaign in your future. If you are, board members have to be integrally involved with that from start to finish. That's a whole different seminar that I do, and that is the roles and responsibilities of advisory board members and core officers in a capital campaign. And 1/4 of that thing is all about getting ready, preparing for the campaign, okay? But that's a major component. Let me go to the next slide and point, there it is right there. Take a look at the last word in that sentence, first sentence, expectations. I think this is the major reason, the major reason that so many of our advisory boards in the Salvation Army are fair, average at best. And that is not enough attention was given to laying out very clear expectations of new board members. Now, I would hope every board that is represented here today has a nominating committee. Everybody? Okay, all right. I'll never forget being at at a board meeting at a very small court, but one with a board, where it was time for the nominating report, and one of the good old boys just chimed in and said, "Yep, I met this guy the other day, and I think he's great, and I think we ought to take him on." Board chair says, "All in favor, say aye." Bam. What do you mean? It took about 30 seconds. No process whatsoever. So I'm not here to talk about what do you do and how do you recruit new board members. That's a whole, it's another presentation. But it has to do with expectations. That is one of the most critical roles that a core officer has in recruiting new members, so that that board member can never come back and say, "Whoa, wait a minute, you never told me that. You want me to give money? You want me to help raise money? You're kidding me. You expect me to come to every board meeting? Every month you're going to, yeah, if that's all written out. Now, that's all part of a job description. So that if I want Jim to come on my board in Milwaukee, first of all, and I'm the core officer, first of all, it's going to be a board member that's gotten Jim involved. And then I and that board member will go see Jim. And I will have with me not only the Salvation Army brochure, you ever seen that red brochure with the cartoon characters? Boy, I don't like that. It just kind of trivializes in my mind, but I'm old school, sorry. But in addition to the perfunctory Salvation Army materials that new board members should be given, should be your board's tailor-made list of expectations. There is no territorial list of expectations. Okay, there isn't. Because I've asked, it doesn't exist. Every board is expected to have their own list of expectations. Problem is, nobody is saying, okay, show us your list of expectations. So Stan Kelly and his staff, with everything else they have to do, on the list of things to do is make sure that every corps has a list of board expectations. It's not happening, and it needs to happen. Because if you have clear expectations, there should be no question in your mind. If anything on that list of expectations hits a sour note with you and during the orientation process, that's when you go, you know what, I don't think this is for me. I really don't think this is for me. Now, let me tell you, one of the most important things that has to go on that list of expectations, and I have seen it included, but normally down at the bottom, is you need to be a donor. And that, in my opinion, should be right up top. So that people know, because what does it say? If it's listed first, second, or third, it's important. As opposed to, and the 10th list of expectations on our list is, we need you to get money. Don't tell anybody I told you. Expectations, incredibly important. Core officers, please, if you don't have that as part of your process for recruiting new board members, do it. Where can you get it? Stan can give that to you, because he's trained to do that. Clear understanding, number 2, of the relationship between the advisory board and the officer. You know, you're not like the YMCA, you're not like the boys clubs, you're not like Boy Scouts of America. You are advisory board members. You're not a board of directors, all right?
Right.
And Captain, does that get in the way a lot?
Sure, I've been at cores where the advisory board members decided they were the board of directors. Because the Army has said that for a lot of things, we need the advisory board's endorsement.
Right.
There's a reason for that, but then they take that on as well. You can't do anything unless we say it's okay. So they deem themselves a board of directors.
Whenever the Salvation Army does a capital campaign, the advisory board has to sign off on it. The Army will not authorize its commencement until they get the endorsement of the Corps Council, the Corps Advisory Board, and then the division. And then it goes to territorial headquarters for approval. A lot of processes in the Salvation Army. It's kind of interesting. Things can get bogged down a little bit at times, but it's, again, I think it's extraordinarily well-run organization, and it's doing overall a very good job. So the Corps officer really needs to make sure that there is clear communication and understanding, not only about how the Salvation Army Advisory Board is to function, what are its responsibilities, because you know that if you get a very strong board member comes on and he thinks it's a board of directors, and that hasn't been explained, am I right? We got a problem.
Yeah,
You've probably seen that.
even I, and president of the board, I gotta be careful. I'm just as guilty of that as anybody else is. We try not let that get out of hand.
That really needs to be very carefully discussed and understood. Let's go to the next slide. In fact, let's go 2 slides down. I want to talk now specifically about you know, the responsibilities of both board members and Corps officers. I want to go back, though. I didn't talk about this, and I think it's extraordinarily important. Probably, arguably representing the most structured division, or advisory board in this division. Do you know what the Salvation Army mission statement says?
I am sure I've read it. I do not know it. I could not give it back to you.
Okay.
I mean, I know what it, I've read it too, but
Right.
we're not active in the day-to-day.
Captain, or excuse me, you're a lieutenant, right? I'm miscounted with the stars. Do you know what the mission statement? I'm not trying to put you on the spot or embarrass you.
Do I know it? Yes, but not word for it.
Okay. Let me read you the Salvation Army mission statement. And tell me if this rings a bell. It should be part of the attraction process, the, what is the word I'm looking for? To go out and trying to recruit new board members. Because our mission statement hits a home run. We don't hold back anything with why we're here. The Salvation Army, an international movement, is an evangelical part of the universal Christian church. We are not embarrassed to say that, and it's right in our mission statement. It's in the very first sentence. Its message is based on the Bible. So if you have a problem with the Bible and the fact that we're a universal Christian church, this organization may not be for you. Its ministry, which has a profound spiritual tone to it, its ministry is motivated by love for God. Its mission is to preach the gospel of Jesus Christ. Does that mean every Jewish person who you want on your board is going to say, well, I can't do that? No. But I think it's important that they know that we are an organization that is driven by the love of God and the teachings of Jesus Christ. And to meet human needs in His name without what? Without discrimination. Now, that has to be clearly understood by anybody who's coming in to the Salvation Army. Let's go to the next slide. You want me to do what? Here's what I believe the Salvation Army should expect of the advisory board. Number one, a respect and appreciation for the Army's purposes and objectives, its mission. We just talked about the mission. A willingness to learn the organization and internalize its case for support. That's why I asked you early on, do you have a case for support? Because your exposure to the community needs to be relatively consistent. I'm not suggesting you quit your day job and go out and grab a bass drum and start beating on the street corner. But you should be spreading the good news of the Salvation Army every opportunity you have, whether you're doing it on your own volition or you're being asked, what is this about the Salvation Army?
Does that mean you want a list of prepared answers? I mean, if someone asks me why I'm a Christian or what Christianity is about or what Jesus Christ is about, I can give an overview of that. Whether I concluded everything correctly, I'm not sure. But,
Yeah.
I mean, that sounds like the same thing you would like for this. I'm not criticizing, I'm just saying that's what I'm hearing.
What I'm suggesting to you is that every board member must respect the mission statement of the Salvation Army. Does it embrace it entirely? Perhaps not. But it respects it and will adhere to it, and is willing to discuss it with those within the community. That's what I mean when I talk about the mission statement. But if we talk about case for support, that's underneath the mission statement. The mission statement of the Army is universal. It's international. Your case for support responds directly to what you're doing in Madison. And that's the thing that,
So
if
it's
I'm...
individualistic in the sense of one court versus another, one situation.
Absolutely.
Another.
What you're doing in Madison is probably completely different than what's being done in Beloit. In most cases, keep in mind there are core programs that every corps is providing. But in your situation, you'd have to have a pretty good memory to probably remember everything that's going on there. But you need to be able to share that good news. I think it's terribly important for you to utilize your skills. You've got lawyers on your board, you've got educators on your board, you've got people with lots of skills, bankers, what have you. Are you using them, corps officers? And not only that, are you working with your board to make sure that you've got a good balance? I worked with a board in New Jersey. They had 16 on the board, 12 of them were attorneys. Not a good situation. Not a good situation. There should be a balance so that you are able to draw on skill sets that you desperately need to conduct your business. Again, because why? You can't do everything. You're to make sure that everything gets done. So, board members, we really need you to use your skill sets. We need you to be vocal. We need you to provide your counsel and direction while supporting the decisions of the whole. I talked to one board chairman not too long ago. He said, well, we just got rid of Joe. And I said, well, what do you mean by that? He said, every board meeting we had, it seemed as though Joe just had to go against whatever the decision was and would drag the meetings on, and things just couldn't get done, and people would walk away upset. And in that case, they went to Joe and said, Joe, we don't think this board is for you. There may be another board out there for you, but the board has just decided to vote you off the island. And they did. Now, is that a bad thing? No. Do you want to try and salvage Joe as best you can, Jim? Absolutely. Because Joe must have been attracted for some good reason. And maybe in the early years, Joe did some good things. But if Joe has been on the board for 35 years, which speaks to a whole different area of what? Class movement. How many years does a board member serve? 3, and then 3 take off a year, and then does that happen? Oh my goodness. Almost never, that's a whole nother presentation, I'm sorry. But these things come to mind. The counsel and the direction. You're there not just to do the bidding of the corps officer. You're there to offer your advice on how things could be done even better. And even if they're good, what did the founders say, Jim? That and better will do. And they meant that. He meant that wholeheartedly, because back in the early days, it was tough going. It was tough going. And he had to constantly encourage his people when they would come back and say, well, we saved 12 souls this week. Well, that's great, but we need to save 50 souls next week, so that and better will do. That's why your council is so important, because unless you speak up and say, you know, we can do better than this, and get the board to agree with you, you can't afford to have the core officer coming up with all the ideas and following his or her lead. It doesn't work that way. It just can't. Otherwise, if you leave it, you were saying earlier that the board was saying, oh, the core officer takes care of that. You remember? Well, that was wrong, but better would do, and it did. 60,000 to 400,000 in 1 year. How did that happen? That's a presentation you need to make. Actually, there's a big casino right down the street from where he is. Next slide, please. Okay, we're there. I'm going to skip over 5 and go back to meeting attendance. The audit that we just completed for the Western Territory, and I don't think I mentioned this, that's 13 Western states, 10 divisions. We met with advisory board members from every division because we wanted to know how they felt they were being utilized, how they felt they were being managed, and what kind of success did they feel they were having. Every one of those divisions where they had a board that it was either a city board or a divisional board, 10 of them. Every one of them listed the number one problem as being what? Number 6. Attendance. Now, you were just saying that. They were saying that they're lucky to get 50% attendance. And so we asked them why. What's the problem? And you got the preliminary, well, people are busy, and, we can't decide whether we should meet for breakfast or lunch or in the evening, blah, blah, blah. But when we got through the surface, what we found was the reason attendance is so poor is because they didn't feel as though they were being properly used. Now, have you been to a board meeting where the board agenda was put into play and 2 or more of the reports were read by the staff or by the officer? Probably not at your place, but I sure been to them. And what that says is that the chairs of these committees may not even feel it's important enough for them to come to give a report. A report on what? They'll just read it for me. That all has to do with how you run your board. I really want to come and watch your board. It sounds really good. And no offense against the rest of you.
One thing we've done is, it used to be that we invited nice people.
Yeah.
Being unkind.
Yep.
Now we look for specific skill sets. And if you look at that way, there may be 5 people out there that can have those skill sets. And you pick the nicest guy at it. But we don't pick random people anymore. Everybody that we pick, we need more financial expertise. So we look for finance people and everything. We do that regularly, and that's really worked out very well.
And do you put into play the professions to see whether you've got a good balance? Is that part of the process?
We haven't had to do that yet, but I know what you're saying.
Yeah.
I think we have real estate people, and we have lawyers, and we have doctors, and we have, you name it.
Mm-hmm.
And that doesn't seem to have been, but an awful lot of people may be attorneys, and you don't know because they're doing something else now.
Yeah.
But I don't think we have an overabundance of that. But that's really helped us a lot.
I don't want to take you off track, John, but I'm just curious as he's talking about that. What is your process for when you've identified a skill set that you want to work on?
We have a very simple process. The person that's ahead of this is unfortunately the person who retired yesterday. But she would, with the board and with the core officers, would say, we need more input, more help in this area. And then she and I, when I was on the nominating committee, I'm not now because I'm president, would she would have these names, and she and I would meet with this person for lunch. And we would say,
Okay.
this is what the Salvation Army is about.
But Ruth Ann would primarily be the one that would make the contact.
She would make she knows everybody. I don't have that skill. But then we would tell them, this is what the Salvation Army is about. These are the expectations, money, time, and we just lay it right out. And then we'd give them some time to think about it. Then also we would show them our facility and show them all that we do. We have 2 different facilities on East Washington Avenue. And then we'd let them decide. That
You
was how we
just
worked.
said such an important aspect of the process, and that is get them on the grounds.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, and some of you core officers may be thinking, oh my gosh, I would never want them to see where we are. Oh, yes, you do. Oh, yes, you do, because they're gonna look at it and say, wow, these guys need a new building. I think I might be able to help them to do that. You just touched on 3 things that I think you all ought to write down. Time, talent, and treasure. Time, talent, and treasure. When you're looking for board members, that's what you need. You need their time, you need their talent, and you need their treasure. And whether that treasure means you're giving it personally or going to get it from others. The 3 T's. Our final report, our firm's final report to the Western Territory was entitled Time, Talent, and Treasure Initiatives.
Another thing we do that I
Hit
think is
beautifully.
helpful is we move people off the board and onto committees if their attendance
Yeah.
stinks. And that allows us to use their abilities, but not to make a bad example of their attendance.
Your
And that-
committee's not made up of board members?
Oh, yes, but what I'm saying, I'm talking about committee meetings. Our committee meetings are made up of board members, but we also have other people from the community who aren't on the board.
So more of it
And so we transfer these people who don't come regularly to that, and they seem to be fairly happy, and it's once a month for an hour and a half or something, and so we've found that creates less unhappiness and makes the board. But we have attendance problems like everybody. We feel happy if we get 75% of the people there. And, you know, we have gone from a board that was quite a bit older to a board who are now probably all averaging in their 30s and 40s. We do have some older board members. I'm obviously an example of that. But that's helped. And these are people that unfortunately are into everything in the community. And we have people who say, I'd love to be on the Salvation Board, but I am up to here with commitments. And we say, okay, well, come back and tell us if your situation changes, and we'll reconsider this.
And can we call upon you for a very special need?
Yes.
They're probably gonna say,
Absolutely.
sure, why
Ruth Ann
are
does
they
that.
so busy? Because they're altruistic up to their eyeballs.
Yeah, absolutely true.
By the way, you asked the question, you just said, they don't have to be a board member to be on the committee?
Well, we have it set up a little bit different, that our committees are all board members, but we also have councils, and our councils
okay.
consist of
Explains
board
that.
members and community members.
Because I advise a lot of Salvation Army boards to put non-board members on their committees, but to have a majority of board members on it, and to have the committee chair board member.
Sure.
You can never have a non-board member as a chair. Yes, sir.
A couple of things that I wanted to touch on is I've only been here a year, and unfortunately, the majority of our advisory board was built on a 19-year employee. Okay?
Wow.
And that employee is no longer with us. And we've lost, I would say, probably 40% of our board consists of the older generation. You know, Trinity sits on the board, and you know, her and her dad, and we have a Christmas committee that we pretty much have nothing to do with. They run the kettles and volunteers, everything. We don't even have to show up. But the thing is that, you know, as officers, that is part of our responsibilities is, you know, to be involved in everything. So we are involved in that committee. But we just recently invited a new person to join the advisory board. But of course, the email went out to everybody who's on the board, according to paper, even someone we've never met, and we've been there almost a year, to say, this person has been working for the Salvation Army as a volunteer for years. And when I asked him if he ever thought about the board, he was shocked. He says, nobody has ever asked me for this. And I said, how? Why? You know, and just by sitting and talking with him, he is the psychiatrist for the school board of Beloit.
Hmm.
So, I mean, he brings a huge section of the community to us. And, you know, the board is like, yeah, we never even, thought why he was ever asked. So,
What you're talking about is going to show up a little bit later in my presentation, and that is what causes some officers to have real difficulty in attracting strong people.
mhm.
So kind of hold that thought. And you had a second point as well?
Well, I believe that that's part of the attendance, is
Yeah.
because of, it was built on the employee and not on the mission.
Right. So what's the answer to that?
How do we?
You almost have to clean house, I
Yeah,
think.
exactly.
Anyway, and you have to figure out a way to do that in such a way that it's not going to appear as though Attila the Hun just showed up in a Salvation Army uniform.
Mhm.
You know, there's got to be a way to do that so that people will say, you know, he may be right. But that is very challenging, and that's where your divisional headquarters development staff, I think, can come in and be very helpful to you, okay?
Can I say one thing about attendance
Yeah,
too?
sure.
A lot of our board, well, not a lot, I'd say about a quarter of our board, go to Florida for winter.
Yeah?
And that, we lost a lot of attendance during our winter months, so what we did was set up, like, we got in the go-to meeting. So they would be able to see the stuff that was being presented and also call in, and I think that's helped. Even
Some
people that are
people's all
in
sense
town.
of tact when they're on the phone.
Yeah, they do.
Conference calls are tough.
Yes,
Board meetings.
right.
because They just start tough for any meeting, am I right?
We shift those people to committees off the board.
But the people
The
that are,
snowbirds, yeah.
our snowboards that are on our board are very
The
involved.
most involved.
The most involved members of our
But
board.
ours are gone 6 months.
Yeah, yours doesn't sound like yours are gone 6 months.
Ours are gone from November to May.
That's 6
months.
Sounded right.
You've just given me a whole new idea for another presentation, but we'll have to deal with that later. Take a look at the sheet I put on your table. And this is the advisory board member fundraising checklist. Now, I've got another form in our system, and it talks more about, or it addresses more just what does your board member know about the Salvation Army, and it offers like 40 different questions. And the responses can be, do you feel as though you are knowledgeable about the Salvation Army's programs? Yes, maybe, no, or not applicable. I don't know if anybody want to do NA, but some do. And I could send that to Stan and get him to put it out. But it really is helpful in determining just how in tune your board is with the Army's mission and programs and your case for support. This document specifically talks to fundraising. Now, I said this early on in the last session, and I've held it for now. But in my opinion, like it or not, really the primary objective of your board is fundraising, whether directly or indirectly. You can help the Corps officer in fine-tuning programs, but at the end of the day, the board really has to take its responsibility for financial solvency for the Corps very seriously. So I developed this a couple of years ago, and I've been using it with Army's boards all over the country. And it asks questions. Do I understand the plans and programs for fundraising? Well, do you? Well, I know they put out a Christmas newsletter. I get it, and I send my gift. And we do that special event once a year. But do you understand what the opportunities are for planned giving? Do you understand what naming opportunities are available? Those are the kinds of things. And so what will happen is your board, if you get them to fill this out, you're going to suddenly get a picture about how prepared your board is for appropriate fundraising. And if you get a lot more no's than yeses on this, then you have a pretty good idea of what your task is, what you need to do to get things moving. And in the case of Beloit, if this applies to you, then what you've got to do is get with your key board members and say, look, here's the results. We need to put together an action plan to figure out how to address these shortcomings. And again, that's where DHQ comes in. The development department is more, at divisional headquarters, at least it should be. But I'm probably getting into territory I shouldn't be treading. But it should be more than just where the direct mail is controlled. It should be a fundraising resource center to every corps. Just like a territorial headquarters, the CRD department should be a strong resource center for the divisions to help them with their fundraising. So don't feel as though you're out there by yourself. You have help. All you have to do is pick up the phone and call. That's important. All right, I want to go to that form. Again, just keep that, take it with you if you like. If you want to use it for other purposes, light a fire in your room tonight, that's good too. Let's go to the next slide, please. Now, we've just talked about what is it that the Corps officer should expect from the board. Let's turn the coin up, okay? This is what I consider to be appropriate expectations of the Corps officer by the board. One, you should be expected as an officer to provide leadership and direction of Salvation Army issues. Issues. What are issues? They're things that come up that may be somewhat ugly, that may have an impact on the Army's image in your community. Those are more local issue actions that you have to address. And you can't hide those issues from your board. If something's going to come out that you know is not going to sit well with the community, for the Army, you got to let your board know first and foremost. You do not want your board finding out about it on the 6 o'clock news. But then the Corps officer is also responsible for making sure that when there are national issues that will affect the overall impression or opinion of the Salvation Army, that you have the latest on that as well. National is usually pretty good about that. They'll send out press releases and what have you to go to every division, and then every division sends them to the Corps. Are you sending them to your board members? Or are you waiting until the next board meeting and saying, hey, you remember what happened 3 weeks ago? You shouldn't do that. How hard is it to send one of those communications to your board? It's an email away. Am I right? I'm so glad to see you guys shaking your head, yes.
We don't do that, but that's something that we really.
I know, but at least you're thinking about it now. Yes, sir.
Can I ask you a question? You guys have crossed it down.
Yes.
It's changed
Yes.
dramatically.
Yes.
Were you pre or post?
Pre.
Pre, so the whole steam of Green Bay.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, we had some trying times.
Yeah, that would be, you know, I heard you guys talking about, well, we have these, still have the same advisory board member?
We had quite an extensive turnover. We had a chair leave in the middle of it. And yeah, it was.
No one ever said the Army gets A+s in how it handles everything. We all know that. I mean, you've been around the block, I've been around the block. We could tell stories, write a book. But I think you're rebounding in Green Bay quite nicely.
Yeah, I think so.
And the light at the end of the tunnel is very clear and very bright.
Right.
But sure, I know they had similar
It was
problems in
weird
Omaha.
for a while.
Omaha had real issues with their crime center.
Yeah.
And those who wanted to fund it, and the Army saying, oh no, we do it this way.
Yeah.
Well, you know, sometimes the Army has to learn how to bend a little bit,
Right.
as opposed to having the Teddy Roosevelt approach to, you know,
Bend,
programs.
we need to bend, don't break.
Bend, don't break. Back to this slide. We talked about a clear definition of your roles, how much time you should be spending, expectation. Continual training and orientation. Now, Corps officers may feel as though they don't have the time to put that together, or they don't have the materials. Again, that's where divisional headquarters comes in, okay? If your board members are meeting once a month, that's terrific. But why not spend one of those meetings in a bona fide training session? So that you're not just doing business as usual, or maybe you allow that month's board meeting to be done by the executive committee, or maybe you just miss it for that board meeting and you cover what is absolutely essential to cover as a prelim to doing some training. And what should that training be? When's the last time you had the director of plan giving come in and talk about, see, when's the last time you had somebody come talk to you about major gifts? When's the last time, see, these things, your board needs to know about these things. I'm going to tell you something. When I asked the question out west, how many on the board have made a plan gift provision, a plan gift provision in your will? Nobody. And I said, I wonder why that is. And the answer, nobody's ever come to do a presentation. Wow. You, as a Corps officer, should demand that your board be exposed to some of these more technical fundraising opportunities that perhaps some of the board members may say, you know, that sounds really good and I can help the Army and help myself through a charitable gift annuity or my Aunt Tallulah, something like that. All these opportunities.
Mr. Marshall, I think that one of the answers we will get from our divisional headquarters, excuse me, for this, it'll be technical.
Okay.
There are 28 corps in this division. The next question is going to be, we just don't have time. So,
Okay. I'm going to just look you right in the face and answer that. Don't take that as an answer. That is not acceptable. I'm looking at the camera. That is not acceptable. Divisional headquarters is there to serve the Corps. It's not the other way around. Oh, quote me on that. But I believe that. I believe that you are you're out in the trenches conducting holy war. All right? And if you need to be reinforced, if you need to be resupplied, it needs to come from that division. And if somebody says to you, we just don't have the time, that's not the right answer. Then you've got to go to the next person up and say, is it true that you don't have time? And I don't think you're going to get the same answer. Yes, sir.
Maybe that's why our attendance is dropping. We just had Stan Kelly there last month, and this month, this upcoming month, we have Kevin Reeder coming in from Social Services, just to meet with the board and explain to them where we're growing, how we're moving.
Right.
And maybe that's why our attendance is down, because maybe some people are starting to feel like they're being held accountable.
Okay, but that is not a bad thing.
Mhm.
Because what that, in my opinion, is part of what I would refer to as the weeding out process. A lot of boards have no class structure, three off a year and come back for 3 and then you're off for something. There are no classes. And so what happens is some of your board members are almost life members without THQ approving them for life membership. They're there forever. How many boards have you seen? Maybe you fellas have some members on your boards. Maybe you've got one on your board list that have been on the board for 30 years. Why is that? It's because there's no process in place to say, well, you serve this length of time, and the board then, the nominating committee, decides whether we're going to ask you to re-up. That doesn't happen. So what happens? You get caught in a position where you've got, let's not call them dead wood, let's not just refer to them as a bunch of old people, but people who are not making a difference. And you, as Corps officer, are what? A difference maker.
And those that are on board are the ones that are continuously wanting to be part of this advisory board.
Which, okay, but somehow you've got to figure out whether they really mean it or not. And if they do want to stay on the board, then what do you have to do? You have to create what we talked about earlier, a brand new set of expectations. And that starts with creating a new job description. Now, if you don't have that, you don't have a job description, you don't have expectations, Lieutenant, you don't have a leg to stand on, you have nobody to blame but yourself or your predecessor. You now have, as a young, energetic lieutenant, and I'm all for you, all for you, you have the opportunity now to make a difference. You are a difference maker, and it starts with your board right here. If you're satisfied with what you have now, then don't do anything, but you're not. You need to go visit Madison. Now, I'm not being funny here.
That's my mentor. My
You-
mentor's in Madison.
There you go. You need to go on up there and observe.
Can we
Not-
go too? I already said, can we go to Manchester?
I know, I got 7 minutes and 14 slides.
Yeah, we don't walk on water, but we try hard.
But
Yeah.
I think at the very beginning, we talked about advisory councils being advisory board of directors. That's what happens with the expectations of a lot of those board members. They feel they're a board of director, and if they've been on that long, and if they have not ever been, had a line to cross or
It's
not
fine,
cross.
gentlemen here.
And that-
included in that.
And that scares off new potential board
Yeah,
members.
yeah.
You know, I'm not gonna commit to something that's a lifelong sentence. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
If you
I
say
know.
it's only 3 years, then it's.
But you see, it's the current state of the Army's advisory board situation around the whole territory. And it's something that's been in place forever. And, you know, we were just talking about this at territorial headquarters. And the fact that it needs to change, and it has to be rejuvenated in Things have to become more vibrant so that we don't have people saying to us, no, I don't want to be a part of that.
Right.
You know, because you're not going to recruit good people
Right.
if they agree that the average age of the board is 106.
Right.
And, you know,
Right.
not picking on the old people again, but, you know, they've got to feel as though they're really joining something important.
Make
One of
them
our
wanna come
biggest
to us.
problems
Yeah.
is we're not attracting the top
Right.
people in the community. They're saying, well, let's have one of my vice presidents. Well, the vice president ends up coming and says, well, I can't really make that decision, it has to go through, and then they got their own protocol, you know?
Right.
Listen, guys, the time is ripe for change, and it can start with you. Start with your core, with your core officer. If you need to make changes, Captain, you know what I'm talking about. Don't wait for a territorial mandate to say, here's the new way. I think the Wisconsin and Upper Michigan division, from what I'm hearing, within the 10 divisions, pretty forward-thinking. And one of the reasons is you got good leadership. You've got Major Thompson, who's been here for, what, 6, 7 years? And you got Stan Kelly and his staff. Good people. They know what they're doing. Take advantage of that. And don't let anybody say we don't have time for you. That's not acceptable. I was director of development in New York City. And if my DC heard that I said that to a Corps officer, I'd have lost my job. Seriously. And I probably should have. Now look, we're going to have to wind this up, so I'm going to have to go through some of this really quickly. These are more expectations. They want board members expect that you're going to give them something worthwhile to do. They expect you to act with integrity. And we've heard some horror stories about some officers, haven't we, who haven't acted with integrity. Always keep that in mind. Loyalty. They want you to be loyal to them. Not just to the Army, but they're a part of the Army. Board members are part of the Army. A little appreciation. Okay? What does it take to say thanks to a board member for a job well done? What does it take to recognize them at a board meeting? And to engage in your ministry with them. Now, we're gonna skip a bit because I'm coming down the home stretch. Please pull out your
Feedback?
what is it?
The worksheet, fast
No,
feedback?
no. The little thing you stick in your computer with all the.
Oh, the flash drive.
Flash drive. I don't know why, I'm old school, I can't remember that. Lucky I can turn my computer on. There's a lot that I haven't gone over. We literally could have taken another half hour here just to get through this, okay? But please pull that out when you get home. Not that you want to do that before you get to bed tomorrow night, but take a look at it, okay? There is one area that I want to talk about, and that is cutting officers some slack. Now, I think most of our guys do that. In your case, how long have you been there?
8 months.
Yeah. The truth of the matter is, they'll never tell you this, but, you know, they're thinking he doesn't know anything. And here's part of the problem why you don't know what you need to know. You know a lot. You're a smart guy, I know that. I'm not trying to be funny with you. But here's what you don't know, because you haven't been prepared. You don't know how to deal with a board, really. You don't know how to go out into the community and make contacts with the right people. You don't know how to write press releases. You don't know how to write PSAs. And you don't have a director of communications. And where are you supposed to be getting that? You should be getting that at the school. Now, you're there for 22 months. Certainly during that period of time, the school should be preparing you for what's going to happen when you get out into your corps. You remember what it was when you were graduated?
I didn't go through the school.
You did not go through the school. The wrong man to pick. Sorry. But, you know, back in the old day, it was even less education. And the officers were thrown out and do the Lord's work, and God bless you. See you when it's time to do the evaluation of your division. That can't happen. And, you know, we really feel in our firm that that change has to take place so that when you get a new corps officer, maybe out of training, that they're going to come with a certain degree of preparation so that they're not going to be looking at you like, well, what do you mean a nominating committee? What is that about? A program committee. You want to look at the finances? No, that's all been explained to you. It's not happening, needs to happen. It's going to be part of my recommendation after this workshop to Stan and to the DC. And maybe they can get word back to territorial headquarters. There are just so many wonderful opportunities for the Army. if the partnership, the power of partnership is absolutely embraced. I'm sure you guys think the world of the Army. You'd feel a heck of a lot better though if there was a higher degree of efficiency.
It's an army.
It's an Army.
If you've ever been in the Army, you know what that means.
So you're up and down, up and down. That's a good point. But I want to fall back on what I said earlier. Let's go to the next slide. I want to do a couple of summaries here. Just keep going. Are we going forward? Keep going. Keep going. Okay. Salvation Army officers are not trained to be experts in every area of operation. There must be a strong active board to secure the Army's position in the community. If you haven't got it yet, make it happen. But make sure you include your board in that. Don't be the Lone Ranger trying to do that. Okay, the next slide. And officers need to know that advisory board members are real people with real problems. You got business problems, you got family problems, you got financial problems, and you can't expect of them they're just going to drop everything when you call. You have to know that people have issues that they're dealing with outside of what is important to you. Next slide. It takes an army. What a wonderful army. Am I right, ladies? Could you ask for a better job? I couldn't. You've got a wonderful opportunity to work with great officers, wonderful board members, but it takes an army. And an army is the whole of a lot of different things. An army of Salvation Army workers plus an army of community volunteers to achieve victory in meeting community needs. I think that's maybe the mission statement for boards, if not the armies. Because at the end of the day, we're just trying to do the most good. Am I right? That's what we're doing here. It's really very simple. We're just doing the most good. What we've got to quit saying is, we're doing the most good the best we can. Don't want to hear that. We're going to do the most good.